Hi there, and welcome to Bite Size Bible, and looking again at the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6, and 7 in the New Testament. And last week I talked a little bit about Jesus having compassion on the crowds and being there to teach and being there to give input into their lives. And I want to read these Beatitudes, verses 3 really through to verse 12 out of Matthew 5 in the New Living Translation, which is a translation I'm not so familiar with. And sometimes it's helpful to look at things in a different translation, as long as it is a translation, and let God speak to you afresh using perhaps a familiar passage, but couched in an unfamiliar way. It says this: God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. God blesses those who are humble, for they will inherit the whole earth. God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. God blesses those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. God blesses those whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God. God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you are my followers. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. So just a couple of things that spring out to me as I read this through. And the first few of these Beatitudes, verse 3 and 4 and 5 particularly, talk about opposites, a contrast of things that are opposite. God blesses those who are poor, realize their need. So people who don't have very much are blessed by God because the kingdom of heaven is there. So even though things appear to be this, the reality is something else. Same in verse 4, God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. There's a mourning, there's a contrition in people's hearts. There might be a grieving because of all that has happened and gone wrong, and yet they will be comforted. Those who are humble will inherit the whole earth. Generally, it's those who push themselves forward, who have an agenda, who will inherit other things. And I notice that the kingdom of heaven is theirs is at the end of verse 3 and at the end of verse 10. God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. So we have these sayings that jump out at us: those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. There's something in us that reacts to injustice. You see it when you're watching a movie or a TV series. When somebody does something which is so evidently wrong, something rises up in us and says, this cannot be. This character must get their comeuppance at some point, and that's a justice in us rising and saying, this isn't right. Those who are merciful will be shown mercy. Sometimes those who are merciful are thought to be weak, but actually they will receive something remarkable from God. The pure in heart will see God. Those who work for peace will be called the children of God. You see, as followers of Jesus, we are called to march to a different drumbeat. The drumbeat of this world, and sometimes the drumbeat of the church, and certainly Christendom through the ages, has been that those who are strong, those that are forceful, those who impose their will on others are in the right, and it's the weak who can't stand up to that. Well, Jesus actually is saying something completely opposite. He's saying that he wants his people to follow him by coming at things with the opposite spirit and saying, no, there's a Jesus way here that is countercultural, possibly counterintuitive, easily ridiculed, easily misunderstood, but hugely, hugely important. And we can't claim to be Christians. We can't claim to be disciples. We can't claim to be followers of Jesus or followers of the way if we don't do what Jesus said. we're deceiving ourselves and the truth isn't in us. So if we want to be a follower of Jesus, let's read, let's absorb, let's take on board what Jesus has said for the honour of his name. May this be a week when the Beatitudes aren't just something you memorize as a child or good sayings, but they reflect your life for the King of Kings.